Welcome back. You are tuned into Salam Media. This is the special focus. My name is Zahid Jadwat, and we are together until about 8:15 this evening. This is an extended broadcast, a special broadcast this evening. We are going to be hearing about social justice and protests from a student's perspective. Of course, this is in response to comments which were made by Professor Habib, who is the Vice Chancellor of the University of the Witwatersrand, on the show last week about student protests at the university. And my guest tonight is Lutfiyya Dean, who is the founder of the 360 Revolution. She's also the vice chairperson of WITS Junction Residents and the deputy secretary of WITS All Residents Council. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Lutfiyya. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me.
Indeed, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. It's a really interesting discussion which we've got to have. This is something which is really important, in fact, the conversation around social justice and protests from a student's perspective. So firstly, to put this discussion into perspective, what is the role of students when it comes to politics in South Africa?
Okay, so according to me, the role of students would precisely be to shape the politics that occurs in the society. Because it's often said the students of today are the leaders of tomorrow, but I believe the way we act now as students basically shape how tomorrow of the country will be. And also, it's very important to realize as well that universities are a microcosm of society. Whatever is seen and depicted in these learning institutes, these technicons, these high schools, it's what happens outside. And every decision we make will impact the future because we are the future employment, we are the future business creators. And it's very important that students take an active role to shape the politics of tomorrow. You're muted.
Apologies for that. So let's just hold on onto one of those that important message you gave us about the role of students and youth in South Africa. But now I want to pick up on this in terms of how the youth tend to participate in the politics of South Africa. And you say we have we influence the politics of the country. But recently, it has appeared as though youth are now more interested in protesting, and this is where it links us up to our conversation for this evening. The young generation of today is more interested, is much more likely than previously to participate in democracy through protesting rather than the actual processes such as elections, etc.
Okay, so your question basically is, what do I feel our protests are like? Okay, so firstly, I think it's very important to take note that if you want something to be peaceful and if you want your opponent to be peaceful, it's vital to have a consciousness and understanding. Because the demands we make in these protests are not something that is not possible or something that is out of the box. The funding is there, the rooms are there, the beds are there, the university has these funds, the government has these funds, and it's all about accountability at the end of the day. And what we're doing as students is basically saying, we are the future, and we need you to invest in us. If you want to see a better South Africa, you need to pave the way for us to have this. Because we are here, we've obtained the marks, we are trying our best, we're doing our part as students. Now it's up to them to give us what we want. And the thing is, universities have begun to operate like a business, ultimately. They have become so entrenched in a capitalistic manner of operating that they are sidelining the disadvantaged. They are sidelining Black students to a point where it's basically saying, here's a sure side of your future before you can even get it. And we need to realize that this cannot be allowed for many more years. We have passed apartheid, we have passed segregation. And we need to pave the way now for previously disadvantaged students to move away from this mindset that it's not possible. We should be able to achieve what we need to. And when I say this, our protests are practically paving the way for that. We are saying that they are destined for success. We are saying that the demands are not unrealistic. Their great-grandparents, their parents were sufferers of apartheid. Their parents did not have the opportunities of even thinking of entering a university space. So what we're saying is we need to make the way possible. And the only way possible is now to protest. Because when we talk, when we meet up in meetings, we disregard it. Because we must also notice now, as a student leader, I'm going to engage on the truth behind it. Before we protest, we engage with several meetings. We have student bodies such as the All Race Council, which I sit on. You have the higher body, which is the SRC, which everyone knows of. We all sit on different committees in conjunction. We meet up, we talk. You have house committees. You have you have the school council, the school councils that work for the different faculties. And we do engage on numerous occasions. And the engagements don't come out with a good outcome because we are sidelined. And they're practically saying we don't have the funding, we don't have the rooms, when there are buildings open, there is money in the accounts. So after these engagements, that's when we protest. So it's not like we wake up in the morning and be like, let's go and protest. We engage thoroughly. We're very diplomatic. We sit on these meetings for weeks until we're fed up and the academic year is commencing and people are still sidelined. They haven't registered. They don't have accommodation, or on the basis of financial exclusion. So that's practically what it is.
Yeah, and that would may lead one to wonder now, why do you think students are being sidelined when it comes to engagements? Why is it that it has to turn into a protest before the authorities can actually respond to your calls?
Okay, so like I said, we must remember that they are operating as a capitalist business. I'm just trying to angle. So they are operating as a capitalist business. And because of that, we can't just engage. We have to apply that pressure. And with universities, especially with our university Wits, I think it's very clear to say that image is everything. They have been perceived as the top universities of Africa, UCT, Wits, the list goes on. And the image only gets altered when we protest and when we speak on media. And that's when they now say, okay, let's meet the students' demands. And I feel like that's very problematic because we do not need to be protesting every year in and out and commemorating our forefathers, such as Hector Peterson, getting shot, getting arrested, it's not necessary. They should understand our demands. And right now with coronavirus and the fees that are being held, the subsidies not being granted, the raise accommodation fees not being granted, I see next year being another outcome like that. And if it means we have to fight again, it will happen. If it means we need to have something as great as fees must fall, it will happen. Because too many parents were retrenched, too many parents lost their jobs, too many parents passed on for a child to be financially excluded when the marks are present.
Mm-hmm. And this discussion would actually extend to the objectives of movements and what you are trying to achieve. And of course, I'm hoping it's for the greater good of each student. But many times these protests erupt into scenes of violence. And so, do you think these objectives of this movement could actually be fulfilled without violence ensuing?
Okay, so I actually was waiting for us to get to that point. So Prof. Habib had said that we glorify violence. And I took that very personally. And he also spoke about middle-class households glorifying violence and partaking in these protests. And I just think that in this day and age, separating classes in a protest is not going to work for you because there's a student body. Yes, we have our few outliers who refuse to assist, to fight to be in class, but majority of the students cannot keep up with the fees. Majority of the students are Black. Majority of the students come from rural areas that are uneven imaginable. So you telling me that we are on the basis of classes at this point is not going to work. We are very united as a student body and we will not glorify violence. But if you are going to call private security who is going to pick us up when we're sitting peacefully and blocking an area, then I'm sorry, we will have violence. Because no one can touch a student when there's women being raped in the university and they cannot come through on time. When there are students who are getting mugged every day and we as student leaders are dealing with it, but yet you're present when we are protesting for a better future. Now you're present. I mean, this alone, we were fed up after 2 weeks of negotiating in the beginning of the year, in January and February. We negotiated, they did not meet our needs. We then went and sat at the Jan Smuts entrance, peacefully so, with our blankets. We did nothing. Tons of private security came. We have footage of this. They came, they started picking us up. They've also now got female securities to pick up the women who are protesting. I got beat, I got lifted, I got hit. Obviously, if you're going to do that to me, I'm going to fight back. Also, I'm angry because my future is at a detriment right now. It's my future we're talking about. It's my career. We are not going to sit back and say, no problem, guys. You can go on ahead with it. Also, last year, we're looking at the F&B buildings. Basically, what happened was security was getting fed up with the amount of people who were accumulating. They then decided to throw a brick at us. If you're going to throw bricks at students, we are going to throw it back. Because we are tired of being oppressed on the basis of classism, on the basis of capitalism, and on the basis of a money-making scheme.
Yeah, and if you put that into contrast with what Professor Habib said, that student leaders lost the support of students, I think that's a steep contrast between those statements and what you are saying this evening. But I also want to get your response to the comments made by Professor Habib last week when he said that those who participate in violent protests, such as those that occurred during the hashtag Fees Must Fall protests, create a vulnerable environment for the poor. And to quote what he said, because of their selfishness.
Okay, so firstly, I want to just understand, how did we create a vulnerable environment for the poor if the poor cannot afford to be there, the poor cannot register? I mean, I myself am one of the beneficiaries of NSFAS myself. I wouldn't be able to study at Wits because my mom has practically raised me as a single mother who works tirelessly to feed me. At high school, I had a bursary. I was fortunate enough. And I'm middle class Indian. Now, what about the poor Black rural student that we're talking about? What then? So my point is, you cannot say Habib cannot say we are putting a poor Black student in a vulnerable situation. What we do when we protest is simply say, you do not have to support our protest if you don't feel comfortable. You do not have to come and sing with us, come and block places with us, come and demand the needs that we want for a better future. But simply do not sit in class and be selfish. And I think it's also very important that Adam Habib stops his dividing and conquering tactics. Because if we were so divided the way he claims, we wouldn't have achieved our success this year of actually getting people registered, of actually getting an academic an exclusion rate return of about 87 to 93% previous year as well. We also would definitely have not opened the buildings that were available. But we took it so far as to going to protest to government and say we want this, and we got it. So if we were so divided the way he claims, we would never have achieved NSFAS. We would have never achieved what we did this year. And we will not achieve what we want next year, which we are very determined of. So dividing and conquering among students will not work. And especially now with COVID and the reduction of fees we want, rich kids' parents also got retrenched. Corona did not pick rich and poor. Everyone was affected. And I think it was an eye-opener to see that division doesn't work. When it comes to politics and socioeconomic factors, division does not work. So I think it's very important to note that next year will be stronger than ever.
All right. And now just to begin wrapping up this discussion. So you did mention earlier on that students are now tired of actually protesting all the time. It simply isn't something that can be sustainable. To always protest, it disrupts the academic progress of students, and it's just not sustainable. So in your opinion, what is it that could be done now to address your issues without having to engage in protests? How do you want to be heard?
Okay, so Prof. Habib also spoke about undermining democracies, which is very hypocritical of him to say, because I think as management, they undermine democracy. They call us to committee meetings, they call us to Senate meetings. We sit in these meetings, we deliberate, we bring a consolidated view on a paper, and then they still disregard it for weeks on end. So for protests to end, it simply needs management and the student body to work in cahoots with each other, to reach a common ground, to provide funding, especially with the government. Wits University as well as the UCT are very, very engaged with the sectors of government. So simply engage and make demands on behalf of the students for our tertiary education. We complain so much about unemployment, we complain so much about low education rates. So work together, talk, and in these discussions, don't talk vaguely or briefly. go further as to say, what is the solution? Provide us a plan. In that way, we can reach the agreement in the first week, which is very imaginative because management doesn't work like that. But if they could do that, it would be a good way. As I said before, an oppressor or an opposition cannot expect peace unless they're providing that platform for it, unless they're also conscious of the situations that the students are coming from. And when you are conscious of something, I think you had to have experienced it. And I think that also goes back to saying management needs more diversity within it. We need to have people who come from these backgrounds to fully understand it because it will be closer to their heart. And from there, I think we can move forward. We can lay a platform of actually overwhelming democracy instead of undermining democracy, as Mr. Habib said.
All right, and I think that's where we are going to have to leave it for this evening. But before I let you go, I just want your final thoughts on how exactly, how we should attain social justice as a whole.
Okay. So when we say social justice, it's very broad. But for me, I think the most important thing firstly is to ensure Black empowerment, to ensure empowerment of the previously disadvantaged groups through funding, through support systems, through incubation of business ideas. So SMMEs need to be developed. Further, I think we also need to ensure that women are empowered on a large scale. As a very great thinker, Thomas Sankara, once said, the revolution cannot take place without women. And unfortunately, we are under siege in this country. So we need to call on all sectors of the government, on society, to now make sure that they empower these women, especially Black women, to empower the Black youth and make sure that we create progressive and safe spaces for the growth of them, because we are the future already. It's not even about tomorrow anymore. What we're doing now is growing businesses as the young groups. And we need to ensure that that's incubated, grown, and we create positive social economic change for society as a whole.
All right, and let me just squeeze in this final this comment which comes in via YouTube, and it's from one of the audience members by the name of Faisal Rundera, who says, "Should the students not study the National Treasury budget?" Your response to this, Lutfiyya?
So, when we say starting international treasury budget, I think it is a very progressive idea. But at the same time, with the amount of corruption that's happening in government right now and the amount of misallocated funds, I think we first need to ensure that government can reallocate the funds to education, because as we all know, right now we are facing a crisis where the government is now allocating funds to SAA, which will mean reducing the tertiary fund. And I think that's already a problem itself, and we are going to fight that. So before we move on to creating a treasury fund with the government, we need to first make sure that those things are dealt with. We cannot be giving money to a company that has already failed us on numerous occasions when students are there right now already suffering. So I think first fix what's happening right now, ensure correct allocation in itself of education, and then move on to strategies like that.
All right, thank you so much for that, Lutfiyya Dean, who is the founder of the 360 The Revolution. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to have this important discussion, this conversation around social justice and student protests. It's a pleasure to have you on the show once again.
Thank you so much.
And that's where we are going to leave it for today. That's the end of the show, the end of the special broadcast. The first hour between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m., we had the executive mayor of Tshwane, who is Mr. Randall Williams, speaking to us about the various issues in the municipality and how he intends on, rectifying these situations, fixing it. We took a few calls as well, which I'm really glad we did. We managed to take a few comments as well. I really appreciate your input as the listeners this evening, and I thank you for tuning in this evening. And from 8 p.m. Till about now, 23 minutes past 8 p.m. Central African time, we've been speaking to Lutfiyya Dean, who is a student activist. That's another really interesting conversation around social justice, and I do wish we had more time to get into that discussion at greater length, but perhaps for another time. But from myself, Zahid Jadwat, and the team, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll do it again next week, same time, same place. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.